Please rise in body or spirit as we sing together hymn number 1073, The Earth is Our Mother. We'll be singing the first 3 verses. The earth is our mother, we will take care of her. The earth is our mother, we must take care of her. Hey, young, oh, young, hey, young, young. Hey, young, oh, young, hey, young, young. Down we walk upon, with every step we take her sacred ground we walk upon, with every step we take. Hey, young, oh, young, hey, young, young. Hey, young, oh, young, hey, young, young. The earth is our mother, she will take care of us. The earth is our mother, she will take care of us. Hey, young, oh, young, hey, young, young. Hey, young, oh, young, hey, young, young. Buenos días y bienvenidos. I am the Reverend Katie Romano Griffin. My pronouns are she, her. Yo soy una pastora aquí. I am one of your ministers here.
I am Michael Thorne, pronouns he, him, the worship associate for today's service. On behalf of the entire congregation, we welcome you to our worship service this morning.
Whether you're joining us in person or online, know that whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived at this beloved place, whatever your gender identity and expression, whatever your beliefs or immigration status, you are welcome here.
If you are new to Cedar Lane, please raise your hand. If you are comfortable doing so, we invite you to stop by the welcome table after the service so our greeters can offer you a brochure that talks about Cedar Lane and also provides a place for you to share your information with us.
I'd like to draw your attention to the announcements page, which was right next to the orders of celebration when you came in. This is a vibrant and engaged religious community where we are working to build a more just world. And there's a lot happening this week. Some of those highlights are in your order of celebration insert.
Okay. Tonight, right here at 7 p.m., the program is called The Constitutional Meaning of Impeachment, and that's with Jamie Raskin, who's our representative and is also a constitutional law professor. You do need tickets, which you can get free online. Our pastoral visitor today is Betsy Binks. She will be available during and after service to support you if you have a joy or sorrow on your heart.
We have someone with us today who is going to talk about DACA and some solidarity efforts that will be happening this week at the Supreme Court. Please issue a warm welcome to Fatima Correas.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Fatima Correas. I'm a DACA recipient, which means I have an expiration date. I'm bound to be deported in March 20 if we don't find a solution to the case of over 800,000 individuals like myself who came to this country for a better life. And I'm not here to tell my story. I'm here for your prayers. I am here to support us and join us on November 12th in front of the Supreme Court, where 9 individuals will have the power to decide what's going to happen with our life and the life of those who are around us and the lives of those who we impact every single day. Thank you.
Now please turn and greet your neighbors, especially our visitors and guests. Hello, neighbors. Body gathered here in the struggle and the power, spirit gathered here in the struggle and the power, spirit draw near, gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, spirit draw near.
for the beauty of the earth.
The spinning blue-green ball, yes.
Gaia, mother of everything, we walk gently across your back.
To come together again in this place.
To remember how we can live.
To remember who we are.
To create how we will be.
Gaia, our home, in the lap in which we live. Welcome us.
As members of the Environmental Justice Ministry team, kindle the chalice, symbol of our gathered community. Please rise in body and or in spirit to share in unison the chalice lighting words on the screen. Embracing the interconnected web of water, air, fire, space, and earth, we kindle a chalice of sustaining hope, love, and justice. As we give thanks for this earth, our shared and singular home, we dedicate ourselves to its ongoing care.
Please be seated. This morning, we honor current and past veterans of our nation's uniformed services, their families, for their service. We express our deep gratitude to all who served, whatever their role, wherever their service took them.
Our roll call this morning reminds us that these are not nameless people who serve. It is quite easy to say that those who died in our wars gave their lives so that the rest of us could enjoy our freedom. It's harder to honor those who died and those who served by resisting the erosion of freedom and by working to prevent war.
As we name the form of national service with which you identify, we invite you to please rise in body and or in spirit and to remain as you are through this recognition.
If you served during World War II, would you please rise?
Fred Peters. If you served during the Korean War, please rise.
If you served during the Vietnam War, please rise.
If you served during the first Gulf War, please rise.
If you served during the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, please rise.
Would those who served in the uniformed services during peacetime in the U.S. or in any other country please rise?
Would all those who currently serve in the uniformed military services, active duty or reserve duty, please rise?
Would family members of anyone who served in the uniformed military services, active duty or reserve duty, would you please rise?
Would family members of anyone currently serving in the uniformed military please rise?
And would those who have a friend or a neighbor who serves or has served in the military please rise?
We honor your service and that of your family member, friend, or neighbor, and the integrity and the courage of your choices to serve.
And we say thank you for your service and your sacrifice, and know it will never be enough. Thank you. You may be seated.
That was incredibly powerful. Thank you. What a way to come into this time of celebrating the joys and the sorrows, holding the sorrows of our community. As we engage in this litany together, every time I raise my arms, I invite you to say with me, we hold you in our hearts. So as we enter this time, let us begin to open our hearts. If you are living through the small and extraordinary milestones of life, we hold you in our hearts. If parenting is your spiritual practice, we hold you in our hearts. If you are mourning the loss of a loved one, we hold you in our hearts. If you live with or care for someone with grief or chronic pain, we hold you in our hearts. If you are struggling with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental illness or addictions, we hold you in our hearts. If you have suffered abuse or injustice, we hold you in our hearts. In our Cedar Lane community, we hold in our hearts Marion and Dennis Torsha. Marion has entered hospice care. Cards are greatly appreciated. We also hold in our hearts Gail Ginther Luce as she navigates this time of loss and remembers her mother, Claire. Gail, Marion, and Dennis, we hold you in our hearts. We also hold joys, the joys of this community in our hearts. And one such joy is that Cedar Lane youth Lucas Kramer was asked to be a featured dinner speaker at an Institute for Advanced Clinical Trials for Children's research session at the Pooks Hill Marriott in Bethesda on October 18th. And the abbreviation for this organization is IACT. He was interviewed about his experiences in clinical trials to support the goal of IACT for Children, working towards expanding adult clinical trials to include teenagers. Lucas, we hold you in our hearts. Let us take these joys and sorrows, as well as the joys and sorrows in our own hearts, into silence together, and know that if you are grieving the loss of a loved one or remembering the anniversary of a loss, you are invited to rise in body or spirit as we hold the silence together. May all hearts broken open feel the spirit of restoration glowing and growing and restoring and meaning-making. And may we always remember that we are never alone. May it be so. Amen.
Each week we give and receive an offering to support the mission and ministry of this, our religious community. And twice a month we share the plate offering with an organization that is in alignment with our mission, values, and convictions, and doing the work in the world. And today we share the plate with Interfaith Power and Light, IPL, an interfaith community organization that has been engaged in bringing faith communities across theological stripes together to be engaged in the work of environmental justice. And to speak more about the work, I'd like to welcome Joelle Novi, the Executive Director. Welcome, Joelle.
Nothing testifies more powerfully to the interconnectedness of the web of existence of which we are a part than the climate crisis. Our burning fossil fuels is pouring heat-trapping climate pollution into our atmosphere with consequences for all life on Earth now and in the future. I'm Joelle Novi, she, her, from Interfaith Power and Light, and I believe that the only thing that can meet this challenge is a mass grassroots movement, and Interfaith Power and Light is building that movement every weekend in congregations like this one. Working with partners like the Montgomery County Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, Mixed Facts, which was founded right here at Cedar Lane, we are building a movement of 10,000 people of faith in over 1,000 congregations in this area who are responding to the climate crisis with great integrity and compassion. I invite you to visit me on the way out if you want to learn more about choosing clean energy at home, for your very own Unitarian Universalist light switch reminder, or to learn more about a December 14th summit for the Maryland climate movement to prepare together for the 2020 legislative session. But mostly I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing the offering with our work today. I can guarantee that every dollar you give will support grassroots, in-person climate work in our area sacred communities. Thanks.
Thank you. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Thank you, Jasmine. Words of the Reverend Lynn Unger: through the work of our hearts and the work of our hands, our love is made real. May we be grateful for all that we bring and share to make this a beloved community. So the cartoon that you see on screen, which I hope you can read what it says, was published by the Pachamama Alliance, a US-based organization that works in partnership with the indigenous Achuar people in Ecuador. And it shows two native people discussing a radical view, a new scientific discovery, that the fact our world is deeply interconnected. Now, the joke is that these scientists have discovered something that is age-old wisdom for indigenous cultures across the world, not to mention Unitarian Universalists. It both highlights the importance of understanding the world we live in while pointedly calling out the dangers of cultural appropriation. Thank you. So this question of intersectionality isn't the first time that science is playing catch up to traditional knowledge, and it won't be the last. As Pachamama Alliance's accompanying blog explains, perhaps the most universal indigenous perspective is the idea of the world inextricably interconnected on all levels and across time. As someone who is involved in immigrant justice and racial justice work, I see interconnectedness manifested in multiple ways in the systems of oppression we are fighting against, such as colonialism, crony capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, in our complicated identities and within our own relationships. I also believe that all our organizing for climate justice in this moment could really benefit from a firm and deeper understanding and application of intersectionality, something that was really highlighted in the global climate strike that the young people around the world led in September. For the first time, the global climate strike was centered in an intersectional analysis and approach and leadership, something we have never seen to the extent and depth that we saw in September. And that is due to the leadership and vision and understanding of young people who, growing up in this time, recognize and appreciate that a lot more than adults do and are moving and leading from that place. So what is intersectionality? Intersectionality focuses on how social categories such as gender identity, race, socio-class, ability, sexual orientation, religion, nationality, and other aspects of our identity interact on multiple levels, contributing to discrimination, exclusion, social inequality, and systemic injustice. African-American law professor Kimberly Crenshaw coined this term in 1989 to describe these deep interconnections in the context of Black feminist struggles in the United States. As Crenshaw reminds us, the theory already existed, but her own experiences led her to give that name. So intersectionality sketches out a pathway that enables solidarity and agency across and beyond social categories. So what does intersectionality have to do with the climate crisis? Well, an intersectional analysis can illustrate how power structures and categorizations may be reinforced, but also challenged and renegotiated in realities of climate change. Within the global South and the colonized, racially and economically stratified North, women, LGBTQ people, communities of color, indigenous communities, migrant people, and other marginalized communities are impacted way more significantly by climate change on both a global and local level. Globally, countries least responsible for emissions and most impacted by systematic oppression, such as colonialism, are those now being hardest hit by climate change. And locally, those most exposed and vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change are poor and marginalized people living particularly in low-income areas. These groups tend, moreover, to be underrepresented at all levels of decision-making regarding climate issues. So an intersectional analysis not only recognizes the implications of the climate crisis, but also makes clear, in the words of Bishop William Barber, how the evil of ecological devastation is directly connected to the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, poverty and inequality, militarism and the war economy, and the distorted moral narrative that prevents us from adequately addressing these issues. So the climate crisis that we are finding ourselves in must be seen in the context of colonialism and militarism, austerity and privatization, capitalism and economic inequality, and all of the various systems of othering needed to sustain them all. An intersectional analysis also helps explain why we cannot simply fight for a greener, cleaner version of this current system by reducing emissions, stopping deforestation, and shifting to renewable energies like wind and solar while they are important. The collapse of our ecosystems and disasters like hurricanes and oil spills have always impacted communities who have less access to resources, such as reliable housing, that would help them survive the economic devastation that comes with ecological collapse. And we saw this disproportionate impact in the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and more recently in the Bahamas after Hurricane Dorian. And we are seeing this in places like Lowndes County, Alabama, where tropical diseases once eradicated are now re-emerging because of the lack of sanitation services and rising temperatures. In Flint, Michigan, where the city schools are now struggling with growing demands for individualized education programs and behavioral interventions for almost 70% of the student population, many of whom are African American. And in St. James Parish on Cancer Alley in Louisiana, in Crosset, Arkansas, and Africa Town in Mobile, Alabama, where chemical companies profit from spreading poisoned air and water to those too poor to escape. Ooh, we have some youth who have joined us. Welcome, guys. Our 7th grade class. We're glad to have you. But the climate crisis not only hurts poor and marginalized people more, it makes them poorer. For example, a study of the 2015 drought in California showed that it led to the loss of 21,000 jobs, with half of them being farm workers. And the wildfires caused by the drought left tens of thousands more people homeless, adding to the already high numbers of homeless in the state. Climate justice and land defense, as opposed to environmentalism, are rooted in this knowledge that environmental degradation perpetuates already existing social and economic injustices. So the solutions must follow suit. As an example, the Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project in San Francisco seeks to organize around ecological crisis in a way that also works toward economic and racial justice in communities of color while honoring leadership from the margins. Gopal Dayaneni, one of Movement Generation's core collective members, explains that the group's approach is rooted in the knowledge that all issues, people and living beings are part of a unified whole. He points out that today's breakdown in personal relationships creates broken bonds with one another that then allow for our disassociation from other relationships, such as our relationships to the ecosystems that we depend on for survival. He specifies that one of the group's solutions focuses on moving toward a regenerative, land-based economy, recognizing that many on the front lines of economic inequality, such as migrants, come from land-based communities themselves. So, for example, creating a garden in a vacant lot close to home serves to not only address direct economic needs, he says, it also calls on migrant communities' traditional and ancestral knowledge of land and work. According to Dayaneni, this type of intersectional organizing shouldn't be considered as somehow to be an unattainable ideal, but rather the only way forward. It isn't just a win-win, he says, it is the only way out. We face a truly existential crisis, and we simply don't have time or resources to afford to not address the root causes. So how do we put intersectionality into practice? Henia Belalia, a French-Algerian climate justice and migrant rights activist, offers some guidelines. She writes, on a personal level, we have to slow down and educate ourselves so that we can name the toxic systems within which we exist. We have to relearn the real histories of the land, of resistance movements, and what it has taken for communities to survive. We must also take the time to talk through all of the connections so that we can build a deeper analysis of the crises we face. During this process, it's important, she says, that we commit to the slow time of genuine relationship building, especially as we learn to journey with communities that we are not a part of in respectful ways. From there, she says, we create space to truly hear each other's stories and bring people together in ways that we can see ourselves in each other. She also reminds us that intersectionality isn't only structural, it is also personal. Most of us carry within us overlapping layers of privilege and oppression. As an immigrant person of color born into a working-class family, I may understand what being on the front lines of multiple oppressions looks like, but I also have and carry the privilege of the economic and social access that my vocation, my college education, and part of family's transition into the middle class have afforded me. Glossing over these very real distinctions ends up allowing historical oppressions to continue to play out unchallenged, minimizing, silencing, and erasing certain voices. On a bigger scale, she says, we need to provide resources and access to those who don't have them in ways that are not tokenizing. In other words, she's talking about the need to stop talking of empowering people on the margins as if they didn't have their own power already. It's about getting out of the way for others to take up space, while valuing the fact that power already exists in marginalized communities. It's also about understanding our own identities, where we benefit from the system and where we don't, and taking responsibility for our layers of privilege in how we move in and about the world. It is about established organizations being watchful of the inequalities they perpetuate, especially in terms of access to resources. Through all this, she is saying we have to commit to working slowly in spite of the urgency of our crises and to holding ourselves accountable when destructive dynamics arise. So, the unprecedented mass consciousness that the September 2019 climate strike has generated and also the profound urgency to our collective survival that couldn't be more clearer, we are being called towards a powerful opportunity to advance the core strategies and struggles that poor and marginalized people around the world have been organizing for decades and decades around economic equity, racial justice, land reform, debt elimination, access to safe, clean, healthy food for everyone. And we cannot lose that sense of urgency. But we also need to deepen our understanding of how this struggle is connected and embedded within existing movements for survival and justice. So let us strengthen these connections, and in the face of this existential crisis, let us renew our commitment to overcome the barriers created by the climate crisis and to also address the roots of all injustices. Then, I believe we can work to find solutions that truly aim for justice and resilience for all. May it be so.
Thank you, Henry, Jasmine, and members of the choir. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Nate Hultman. My pronouns are he and him. My family and I have been coming to Cedar Lane for about 11 years, and I am currently one of our trustees. I also work on policy to address climate change, currently as a director of a center in the policy school at the University of Maryland, and also with some earlier experience in government in the previous White House.
You mean the Obama administration? Say it.
The Obama administration, yes. It's not the current one. So I'm grateful today to be able to share some reflections on our current climate moment, and in light of Reverend Abhi's earlier comments, how we are called as a religious community to understand, embrace, and act to address what is now correctly called the climate crisis. This past September, world leaders gathered at the United Nations in New York for a global climate summit, which was also the moment around which the global climate strikes were focused. The logic for the summit was simple. Over the course of the next roughly 1 year, countries around the world are due to reevaluate what contributions they can deliver to address climate change and to announce those targets within the process that is set up by the Paris Agreement. The summit, which I also attended, was seen as the starting gate of what is hoped will be a period that will see increased global ambition to take bigger steps and more quickly. Regrettably, the summit itself was a disappointment. It did not produce the wave of commitments that are needed, nor did it realize the dream of ambitious climate action in the present. What the summit did, however, was show us where we as a global community are falling short. And to add to that, just last week, the United States initiated a year-long process to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change, which would leave us as the only nation not party to what remains our best global hope for coordinating the international response to climate change. In contrast, the science is clear that climate change is actually a much bigger and more immediate problem than many people recognized just a couple of years ago. Although, as Abhi mentioned, some people have known for a long time. The impacts are already being felt today, and these expected at even moderately warmer levels are significant and broad-reaching. As we heard, they will certainly impact the vulnerable and the poorest most. Even with very rapid reductions in emissions, it's expected that by 2050, hundreds of millions of people will be at risk from severe and significant climate impacts. We know that the window for keeping warming to even these levels, while closing rapidly, still remains just open. But the timescale for that change is shocking. We have about a decade to realize reductions of global carbon emissions by half. We have about a decade to reduce global coal use by 70%. We have about a decade to increase global renewable energy by about 60%. And finishing the transformation of our global economy, in which we move almost completely beyond fossil fuels, must happen by roughly 2050. So while that window does remain open, it is a massive task, and the scale is staggering. A new and clarion voice speaking this truth comes from that youth climate movement, for which there are many leaders across the world, but also includes Greta Thunberg, a 16-year-old Swedish teen who, about a year and a half ago, began striking for climate every Friday outside the Parliament building in Sweden. For many months, she sat alone, a hand-painted sign next to her as she tried to convince the important people in the Swedish Parliament to do more about what she understood correctly from the science to be an emergency. Soon, more people noticed, and soon others became inspired to join her. By February of this year, she was invited to the gathering of the world's economic and political elite in Davos, where she spoke to those assembled in what is normally a cozy gathering. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear that I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is. And this is where our practice as a religious community not only calls us to act, but also provides the scaffolding from which we, working with others, can support the launch of a truly integrated, inclusive, global action. In this moment, it is our roles as spiritual communities of faith that is a fundamental part of how we can realize the global response to climate change. And by communities of faith, I include those of us in religious and spiritual communities, and others of us rooted in the philosophy and values deeply held across diverse humanist traditions. Together, we build the groundwork for a broader and inclusive politics rooted in the values of our traditions and a conviction of faith that we can realize the changes needed. And although I am not much of a religious scholar, my musing is, what is faith? But meeting the world where it is and knowing that despite the odds, that we can make a difference as our values drive us to do the needed work in the world. In this context, despite the seemingly long odds, there are in fact signs of change that animate that faith, signs of the broader awakening that Greta was invoking. If in a decade or two we are able to look back and narrate the story of how we did it, these signs of change will have catalyzed a much broader shift in our local, our national, and our global politics. As many of you have witnessed and even perhaps participated in, youth around the world have been coordinating a series of massive climate strikes. Technology costs continue to drop in ways that surprise the experts. And across the world, there is a groundswell of people stepping up to be the driving force catalyzing our cities, our states, our businesses, our countries, and other organizations to respond. Even here in the United States, while attention often focuses on the chaos at the national level, the reality of climate action happening across the country may surprise you. The coalition of actors committing to action on climate, including cities, states, businesses, tribal groups, communities of faith, universities, and many more, now numbers over 3,800 and includes governors of both parties from 25 states. This coalition is globally significant, representing more than 65% of the US population and nearly 70% of GDP. Were it a country, it would be the world's second largest economy. And commitments are being made by state legislatures, city councils, and many others are becoming much more ambitious, including 9 states this year adopting carbon neutrality goals. So we are not alone, and we are already on the way, but more is needed. Broadly speaking, there are 3 major elements that can be helpful as we think about applying this at all scales, from individual organizations to global. First, and maybe the most obviously, is to plan and implement technological changes wherever possible and as rapidly as possible. This includes completely decarbonizing electricity, switching all possible uses to this clean electricity, reducing our energy usage, and supporting nature-based solutions such as forests and ecosystems. Second, remove the social license for using fossil fuels. Yes. Remove the social license for using fossil fuels. That means not only to stop using them, but also make it not okay to be seen to use them. And that means shutting down fossil supply as well as demand. Third, and perhaps most challenging, the transition requires a broad and deep politics that is inclusive and generates benefits that are broadly shared. As Reverend Abhi discussed earlier, we cannot solve this one issue without recognizing its deep interlinkages to the many other challenges facing us today. Putting it in UU terms, successful action must be grounded across all 7 of our pillars. And finally, let's turn to our own community here at Cedar Lane. How can we show up to address the climate crisis? Here's where we need creative energy across this community, working with our award-winning environmental justice team and with reflection across the community on how our values and our faith call us to act today in 2019, particularly when those reflections may be uncomfortable. And as we do this, here are a few aspects that strike me as being particularly salient. So first, and again, most sort of obviously in some ways, we can look to the choices in our own lives and our own households. This could include reflecting on our own technology use, our own energy use, and other behavioral and consumption choices. It may come as uncomfortable news, but pathways to 1.5 degrees are just not compatible with gasoline and diesel engines, with gas heating, and other fossil fuel use. Second, we can and must look to harness the power of our own organizations that you might work with in the rest of the week, but also with our congregation here. The scale of the problem demands that we go far beyond assessing and improving our individual choices, so we must look to push our organizations. Our work as a congregation is already active and encompasses environmental, social, gender, racial, and other forms of justice. And this externally facing work can be informed and be energized by how we are called to respond to climate. Third, we are just about to embark on an exciting major renovation of our sanctuary. Yes.
Yes.
But given the last period between major capital improvements was roughly 60 years, we can reflect on how we will responsibly stage our transition to a low-carbon or zero-carbon facility. Fourth, we can work with and support activities with our broader UU Association. At the UN Climate Conference last year, I was present to discuss some of our work on subnational US climate action as part of some bilateral country briefings. One of our team was a bishop from the Episcopal Church, and he remarked that the UUs, as he said, punch above our weight in issues like this. So let's think about how we can support them or directly participate to do more. Finally, we can work to support even broader interfaith partnerships that work on climate. This is a global challenge, and values-based action across all faiths and non-religious groups will be, I am convinced, the core driver of the broad support needed for change. I do not know yet how we will do it, but I am certain, I have faith, that with a new and intersectional spirit of community, love, and work, we can. So let's do it. All right.
Please rise in body and or in spirit to sing Wake Now My Senses. The words are on screen, verses 1, 2, 3, and 5. Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of creating all. Keep the order of creation, O God. Giving, receiving, as God shows us how. Wake now my and as you are able, hold hands or bump elbows with your neighbor. We close our time together with this poem, I Am My Planet's Keeper, by Francisco Ferreira.
I am the dreams of my ancestors growing more vivid by the day.
I am the boat that ferries my people over shark-infested waters.
I am the candle in a sea of darkness, forever lighting the way.
I am the sage against the machine, cleansing society of its ills.
I am the roots that refuse to stay buried.
I am a stalk of corn rising higher than Confederate statues.
I am my grandmother's pot of beans ready to nourish a whole generation of freedom fighters.
I am the sledgehammer to Trump's wall.
I am the monkey wrench that shut down the pipeline.
I am the clenched fist, bloody but unbowed.
I am the Ngaria gardener on the streets of Huntington Park.
I am Trayvon's hoodie positioned between the world and him.
I am the seventh generation.
I am the caged bird that sings of freedom.
I am the flesh wounds of water protectors in Standing Rock.
I am the lead pipes in Michigan.
I am the ghost of the West African black rhino, extinct but not forgotten.
I am a red bandana, the first and only line of defense between a farm worker and toxic chemicals.
I am the dying cries of the Great Barrier Reef.
I am the graffiti on a gas storage tank.
I am the dissident in a black mask.
I am the resistance. Let us say together, I am the resistance. Please be seated for the postlude that Henry is going to share what it's about.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Henry Segrishi, pronouns he and him, and I am a simple director of music. And for the last decade and a couple of years, it's been my pleasure to take you from where you are, as Nate said, and move you forward according to whatever the sermon topic and the general consensus of what we were worshiping was all about. And that's been my pleasure. It's been a marvelous experience. But I also felt that there should be some time to relax and enjoy things without necessarily need to clutch everything with meaning. So we started this concert series. And next week, we're going to bring back a second-time performer, Ron McFarlane. He was here in 2011, I believe, with his group Earhart. At that time, they were nominated for a Grammy for their crossover work. But Ron is a fantastic lutist. He's been at the Renaissance fairs in Maryland for years. He performs all the repertoire, Baroque, Renaissance, Bach, Passacaglia, and some of his own selections. He'll be here next Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. My eyesight is bad, I guess. I wrote, it's British, it should be Banish Misfortune in the program. That's what you're going to hear here in a moment.
I thought it was time.
No, just bad eyes. Anyway, so I'm on furlough. It's the congregation's opportunity to show that you can function without your music director being here. So take that flyer that's out there in those stands and or pass the Facebook and the patch and whatever. I've put it out there and fill the hall for Ron because he deserves it. He's a marvelous performer. 4 o'clock. Here's a tease. Banish Misfortune.
Thank you.